Hey fellow ghouls, I'm Ivy and today I'm going to be sitting down and doing a longer form video of my spooky stories. I'm going to try and do them on a Saturday only because Spooky Story Saturday kind of makes me, happy inside, like alliteration. And if you enjoy this, great. If not, then that's fine. I just wanted to try something a bit different and see what you thought. So yeah, let's get into it without me waffling too much, which I tend to do. I like waffles, all types of waffles. Okay, let's go. 6 people, 1 farmhouse, 1 night. And by the time anyone realised something was wrong, the killer had already been living with the bodies for 3 days, eating their food and feeding their cows and sleeping in their bed. And clue, it wasn't Goldilocks. No, that was a really bad joke, I'm sorry. Over 100 years later, we still don't know who that person was. So, content warning right at the top, because I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Today's case involves child abuse and the murder of children, and if that's not something that you can sit with, then I love you. Go and watch something else and I'll catch you next time on here. There's really no hard feelings. Look after yourself first. And if you're staying with me, then buckle up because this one is dark even by the standards of what I'm into. And we're going to go to Bavaria. We're going back to 1922 and we're going to a tiny isolated farm where 6 people were brutally murdered, and the killer was, by all accounts, watching them for weeks before it happened. This is the Hinterkaifeck Murders. And before we even start, I have to address the elephant in the room. Hinterkaifeck. Hinterkaifeck. I'm going to butcher this throughout the entire video. I'm so sorry to Germany, I'm sorry to Bavaria, and I'm really sorry to anyone who actually speaks German and is currently watching this with their hand over their mouth. And we're all going to get through this together, I promise you. It might be painful, but we're going to do it, okay? So let's go. I have really been practicing doing my homework. Hinterkaifeck. So the first thing you need to understand is where this farm actually was, because the location matters here a lot. Hinterkaifeck wasn't really a place, it was a single farmstead. The name literally translates to behind Kaifeck. Kaifeck was a small village and this farm was a bit behind it, half a mile behind it to be exact, tucked up against the woods. So it's self-explanatory. It's in Bavaria, about 43 miles north of Munich, in the middle of nowhere. And in 1922, the middle of nowhere really meant the middle of nowhere. We're talking no electricity, no telephone, no nearby neighbours, apart from one guy who lived about half a mile away. The nearest village was Groben. Groben. Just double check. Groben. And there were no streetlights, no cars rolling past, nothing. Just woods, snow, and it was pretty peaceful but pretty quiet. And I want you to picture that for a second because that's quite integral to the case. Imagine being in a house where the nearest help is half a mile through the forest at night in winter with no way to call anyone else. If something happens, you're pretty much on your own and there's no one coming. That's where these 6 people lived. Just hold on to that thought. Okay, the Grubers. Let's talk about who actually lived at this farm because this is where it gets complicated. And I need you to bear with me because the family dynamic here is genuinely going to matter when we start looking at suspects later. And listen, I'm going to tell you the facts because they're public record and they matter to the case. But I just want to say up front that the children in this story are victims, full stop. Whatever the adults around them were doing, those kids did not deserve any of what happened, including what happened that night. So at the head of the household, we've got Andreas Gruber, 63 years old. He was the patriarch and by all accounts, not a great guy. I'm trying to find a nice way to put this, but I really can't. He was reportedly a strict, gruff, deeply unpleasant man. That's a quote. His neighbours didn't like him. His extended family didn't like him. Even his son-in-law, before he died, apparently hated living at this farm because Andreas was so stingy that he wouldn't let anyone eat properly. Sounds like a cool guy. Andreas has also been convicted, and I want to be really clear about this. He was convicted in court in 1915 of having an incestuous relationship with his own daughter. What a dick. He went to prison for a year, so it's not gossip. This is actually on his record, and we'll absolutely come back to this. His wife, Kazila Gruber was 72 years old. We actually know the least about her, which is sad on its own. She'd had children with Andreas, but most of them didn't survive infancy. By 1922, she was the matriarch of this... Sorry everyone, it's like a heat wave today, and it has to be today when I'm recording. I'm so sorry. I know this is serious, but I need a breath. Okay. By 1922, she was the matriarch of the farm, and that's about all we really get from the historical record. I'm sorry. This isn't even a funny story, and I'm making myself laugh already because I'm so nervous. I wish I had more to tell you about her. I really do, but from my research, I couldn't really find anything else. If anybody does know anything, feel free to share. Then there's Victoria Gabriel. She's the daughter, and honestly, Victoria's life is just so much. It's so sad. She's 35 years old. She's been married to a guy named Carl Gabriel back in 1914, but Carl got drafted into the World War I, and basically immediately after the wedding, he died in the Battle of Arras in December of that year. They'd been married 10 months. She was 28. So Victoria comes back to live with her parents at the farm as a widow with one daughter, a smaller Kazila, little Kazila, who's named after her grandmother. And you might think, okay, that's a really sad story. She's a war widow raising her kid. But this is where it gets really dark, because Victoria was the same daughter Andreas had been convicted of abusing. And whatever was happening between them, it didn't stop. In 1919, Victoria gave birth to her second child, Joseph. And the official paternity of Joseph is, depending on who you ask, either the next door neighbour, Lorenz Schittenbauer. I'm so sorry. Why am I laughing? Schittenbauer. Stop it. Schittenbauer. Okay, I'm such a child. I'm so sorry. Oh, I've just looked closer and it's Schittenbauer. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Fucking idiot. Need a bit of a fan on me. It was either the next door neighbour, Lorenz Schittenbauer, or, and this is what Victoria herself repeatedly admitted to Schittenbauer at the time, her own father. That's the household. That is what was happening behind the doors of this farm. And I'm not telling you that for like the shock value. I'm telling you because it becomes really relevant when we start asking who might have wanted this family dead. Now, Victoria's two children, this is the part that's just honestly so heartbreaking. Just so you know, Kazila Gabriel was 7 years old. She went to the local school, and by all accounts, she was a really sweet kid. She was bright, helpful around the farm. She liked the animals. She was just a normal little 7-year-old. And Joseph was only 2. He was a baby. Whatever theories you read about this case, whatever motives, whatever drama between the adults of the family, the kids did not deserve this. And I just feel like I need to say that out loud. And finally, and this is the most heartbreaking detail before we even get to the murders, there's the maid, Maria Baumgartner. Sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I keep laughing at things and it's not even appropriate because I am sad. I'm just really nervous. I get like hysteria sometimes. I'm sorry. Maria Baumgartner. She's 44 years old. Maria was new. Like brand new. She had literally just been at the farm for less than 12 hours when she was killed. How sad is that? The previous maid had quit 6 months before. We'll get to why in a second. That's a bit of tea. And the family had been without help for that whole time. So Maria gets dropped off by her sister on the afternoon of March the 31st. She'd never been to the farmhouse before. She didn't know those people. Her sister hugged her goodbye and left. And Maria worked one shift and then she died. That sister was probably the last person outside the family to see any of them alive. Okay, so now we get to the part of this case that's, I'd say, unhinged, because the Hinterkaifeck murders weren't just a sudden burst of violence. There was a build-up to this. There were warning signs, and the warning started months before. Roughly 6 months before the murders, the family's maid quit. Her name was mxrdered, and depending on which source you read, she either left because she'd had enough of the place, or because she thought the house was haunted. She told people she was hearing strange noises in the attic, like footsteps, like someone was walking around above her at night. And whether she actually believed it was a ghost, or whether she just thought something isn't right here, and, you know, I'm off. Either way, she packed her stuff and walked out 6 months before the murders. Now, Crescent is going to come back into this story later. Remember the name though, it matters. After she leaves, the family is on their own, and that's when even more stuff starts happening. So first, and this is just totally weird, Andreas finds a newspaper, a Munich newspaper, on his property, which doesn't sound like a big deal, except nobody in the household had bought it, and nobody nearby subscribed to that newspaper. Andreas thought that maybe the postman had dropped it by accident, and the postman said he hadn't done it. So where on earth did it come from? Did someone leave it on purpose? Was somebody reading the news on Andreas' property? And we just don't know. Then, and this is the one that really makes my skin crawl, it gives me goosebumps, but about a week before the murders, Andreas goes outside one morning and he sees footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow. Fresh footprints. That's really hard to say, actually. Fresh footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow. Coming out of the forest, walking up to his farm, and yet there were no footprints leading away from it. There was only one set of tracks. From the forest to the farm, whoever made them came to the property and didn't ever leave it. And you know, I thought about this so much because, like, if I saw footprints leading to my house and not away, I'd be like packing a bag and like hot-footing it out of there. I'd be moving. I would be on a flight to the next country. I would literally be gone. Like, would you hang around to see who was hiding in your house? I really would not. I mean, to be fair, these days there's a Ring doorbell and I would know because I would be like Hawkeye-ing it. So yeah, there's that. But, you know, bless them. But Andreas, in any case, he was just like, you know, makes a mental note of it. He mentions it to a couple of neighbours. He doesn't call the police. He says he's got his rifle. He's not afraid. And whatever's coming, he can handle it because he's like a big guy or whatever, tough man. Yeah, whatever. Well, at least he thinks he is, but, you know, he's also pure evil. Anyway, my guy, you should read The Room. The Room is yelling at him back. Around the same time, the family starts hearing noises again, footsteps in the attic at night. Andreas goes up there with a lantern. He searches the whole attic, but he finds nothing. He's a dumbass, so what does he know? But in any case, the noises, they don't stop. They also realise that one of their 2 house keys has gone missing. Like, would you not think that set alarm bells off? Because it totally would me. But they can't find it. It's disappeared. Which means whoever has it can come and go from the house basically whenever they want. And if you're already hearing footsteps in your attic, that should be like 100 alarm bells, red flags going off all over the show. But, you know, they didn't leave and they didn't really do much about it. Like, I'm not victim blaming at all, but I feel like they probably couldn't stand up to Andreas and say, like, this is weird, we want to do something about it. He seems like the kind of man who just rules with an iron fist. So I'm totally blaming Andreas for this. And then there's one more detail, and this one's like another weird thing. The night before the murders, little Kazilla, the 7-year-old girl, told a friend at school that her mum and her grandfather had had a massive screaming row the night before. It was so bad that Victoria ran out into the forest. Hours later, somebody found her and brought her back. So Victoria, on the night before she was murdered, had tried to leave. She didn't get away though. Okay, the day of Friday, March 31st, 1922, by the afternoon, the family is functioning kind of normally. Obviously, that's loosely put in their dynamic, but it was normal for them. Maria Baumgartner arrives with her sister to start work as the new maid. The sister leaves. Maria gets settled in. And then, well, we have to use the word probably for a lot of what happened next because nobody was alive afterwards to confirm what had happened. But sometime that evening, after dark, the killer made their move. Based on the crime scene, here's what investigators think happened. One by one, 4 members of the family were lured out into the barn. Andreas, Kazilla the elder, Victoria, and then little Kazilla, the 7-year-old. And here's the thing that messes me up. Like, why did they all go out like that? Picture this. It's pitch black and freezing. Something or someone is in the barn and 4 members of your family go out there one at a time and don't come back. And the next person also follows and goes out to check. And they don't come back either, and the next person also goes. So theories range from the killer faked an animal in distress, so they kept going out to check on the cows, or the killer was someone they knew, and they were calling for help, or maybe they were calling for each other. We genuinely just do not know. But one by one, they walked out into that barn, and one by one, they were struck over the head with a mattock, which from what I googled is basically a kind of a pickaxe, and that's what killed them. The bodies were found stacked and arranged, so the killer had put them that way. Andreas, Kazilla the elder, Victoria, and then little Kazilla all in a pile in the barn with hay over them. And little Kazilla, this is like the worst detail in the entire case. She didn't die immediately. The autopsy showed that she was alive for hours after the attack. She'd been beaten, but she didn't die straight away. They found tufts of her own hair clutched in her hands like she'd been pulling it out. She was just 7. I'm sorry, it's just so heartbreaking. And in the house they killed Maria, the brand new maid, in her bed. She'd been there less than 12 hours. And then they killed Joseph, the 2-year-old, in his cot. 6 people died in one night with the same weapon. Now here's where the case goes from horrifying to just surreal, because the killer didn't leave. The killer stayed on the farm for 3 days. Investigators figured this out from the evidence at the scene. The animals on the farm had been fed, not just on the night of the murders, but in the days after. Someone was milking the cows, and someone was feeding the dog. The dog, by the way, was found tied up calmly when the bodies were discovered, which suggests that the dog knew who the person was. Smoke was coming from the chimney for 3 days after the murders. Neighbours had seen it and they confirmed that. They just thought, oh, the Grubers must be at home, so they didn't check. Food had been eaten in the kitchen. Meals had been cooked. Bread had been cut. Whoever killed this family sat down at their dinner table, that's absolute cheat, with their bodies in the next room and ate. That's just disgusting. And I keep revisiting it in my head, like, what kind of person would be able to do that? You just kill people, including a baby and a 7-year-old innocent child who was taking hours to die, and you don't run or you don't panic. You just sit down and make yourself dinner. That isn't someone who lost a temper and snapped. That's someone who is, I don't know what that is, it's calculated and not normal human behaviour. That's the level of detached that I cannot wrap my head around. Investigators also found evidence that whoever had done this had been camping out in the farm even before the murders. Roof tiles had been moved on the north and south sides of the house, like someone had created spy holes to look down into the rooms. That's so creepy. There were indentations in the hayloft, like someone had been sleeping up there. And the footprints in the attic, the missing key, the newspaper. It wasn't a ghost or anything paranormal. They weren't just paranoid. Someone was actually living in their house and watching them, sleeping above them, possibly for weeks before. The bodies weren't discovered until Tuesday. Okay, side note, I've had to go away and come back because has anyone got a Sony ZV-E10 Mark II? Mine keeps overheating, and if you've got any tips for that, I've bought a separate power supply with a dummy battery. Apparently that helps, and I just can't stop it overheating basically. So if you have any tips on what to do with that, that would also be awesome. Honestly, it's driving me mad. But okay, let's get back into the story. Hang on. Okay, we're back. Okay, guess who's back? Tell a friend. God, I need a better place to be doing my stuff, don't I? You know. Right. Okay. Oh, hello. So, April 4th. The bodies weren't discovered until Tuesday, April 4th, 4 days after the murders, and the reason is really tragic because the Grubers were so unpopular and so reclusive. And nobody really wondered where they were if they didn't show up to things. Little Kazilla missed school. Nobody panicked. The family missed church on Sunday. Victoria was in the choir and didn't show up. People just kind of shrugged like, oh, the Grubers are weird, you know how they are. Mail piled up at the post office and still nobody worried. It wasn't until a mechanic, a guy named Albert Hoffner, came to the farm to repair an engine on the morning of April the 4th and found the place totally silent and abandoned. And then people started asking questions. He waited around for about an hour and then he just did the repair anyway, by himself, and then left. Hoffner is, by the way, theoretically one of the last people to be on the property before the bodies were found. So just imagine that being your day. Like, you go to fix a tractor and there are like 6 dead people in the next building and you're just unaware of it. Later that afternoon, the next door neighbour, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, remember that name? Here he is. He got worried enough to send his teenage son and another kid over to check on them. They came back saying nobody was there, so Schlittenbauer went himself. He took 2 other neighbours with him. He forced his way in through the gate and they found the bodies in the barn. And here is where Lorenz Schlittenbauer does something kind of crazy. Right after they find the bodies in the barn, bodies that, again, you could reasonably assume were put there by a killer who might still be on the property, Schlittenbauer just casually walks over to the locked front door in the house, unlocks it with a key that he had on him, and he just walks inside alone. And remember, a key had gone missing from the house just before the murders, and nobody knew where it was. And then there's Schlittenbauer just turning up with a magic key. He goes in alone and he finds Marie's body and Joseph's body. And that's when his neighbours later ask him, like, hang on a minute, why did you go in there alone? The killer could have still been inside. What the hell's wrong with you? And he says, I went to look for my son. His son, as in Joseph, the 2-year-old, who he was claiming now as his. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about this guy because he is, like, really sketch. He is suspicious with flashing neon letters. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was the Gruber's nearest neighbour. He lived about half a mile away, and he had been in a relationship with Victoria. He was the man that Victoria had wanted to marry, who was officially listed as Joseph's father on the birth certificate, and who had reported Andreas to the police back in 1919 for the ongoing abuse. So he knew everything that was going on. He knew the family dynamics, he knew the property well. He'd been Victoria's lover, he'd been involved with the messy paternity dispute around Joseph. And here's where it gets even weirder. Schlittenbauer's own first wife had died in 1918. He'd remarried, and then he and his new wife had a baby, and that baby died in infancy, right before the Hinterkaifeck Murders. He'd just lost a child, and he was reportedly being asked to pay child support for Joseph, who he wasn't even sure was his. So one of the leading theories at the time was that Lorenz had snapped. He couldn't stand it anymore, that trauma plus money pressure plus rejection by Victoria plus Andreas being, just his Andreas self. He just decided to wipe out the whole family. And then he kept doing things after that made him look really guilty, like first with the key and just walking into the house alone. That's not normal behaviour. And second, he disturbed the bodies at the scene and moved them around, compromised investigations before police had arrived. It said online that he had explanations for why he'd moved the bodies, but I didn't see what they were, and I can't really think what they could be that would be good enough. And thirdly, this one really gets me. 3 years later, in 1925, the farm had been demolished, and a police investigator came across Schlittenbauer just kind of standing there on the empty plot, looking at the ruins. And the investigator asked him, what are you doing? And Schlittenbauer says, "Oh, I was just thinking," and this is a quote, "the killer would have had a hard time burying the bodies in the barn because the ground was frozen." And the investigator's like, "How do you know that? How do you know the killer tried to bury the bodies or bury anyone? That's not public information. How do you know the ground was frozen at that time?" Schlittenbauer's defense was basically, "Well, I'm a local farmer. I know what the ground was like in March," which is fine really, but it's also a really weird thing to say. Schlittenbauer was investigated multiple times and he was never charged. He spent the rest of his life suing people for slander whenever they called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. And he won those cases, so legally, he's not the killer. But did everyone in his village think he did it? Oh yeah, pretty much. And he died in 1941, having never been charged. If he did it, then he took his secret to the grave with him. Schlittenbauer is theory number 1, but there are lots of other theories. Let me just run through the big ones quickly. So theory 2 is Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, the one who supposedly died in the Battle of Arras in 1914. The theory goes that Carl actually didn't die. He survived, deserted, went on the run and came back to the farm 7 years later, and then found out that his wife had had a child with her own father, and he completely lost his mind. The problem with that theory is his fellow soldiers swore they saw him die. His body was reportedly identified by people who fought with him. So unless this is the most elaborate fake death in military history, Carl Gabriel was very much dead by 1922. Some people in the village still believed it for decades though. There are apparently rumours that Carl was spotted in Russia after the war. None of that's been verified, and the story I think people wanted to believe because it had a kind of dark poetic justice about it. But it's almost certainly not true. Theory 3, it was Andreas himself, murder-suicide, or murder-unalive. Sorry, YouTube hates that word. This one I want to dismiss quickly because physical evidence rules it out. His injuries were not self-inflicted. Same with Victoria, this wasn't a murder-unalive. Somebody else did this. Another theory is it was drifters, wanderers, deserters from World War I. Germany in 1922 was a wreck. The economy was collapsing. We're literally only a year out from hyperinflation when people would be carrying wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread. There are unemployed soldiers everywhere. Some of them were desperate. So one theory is that some random drifter found the farm, killed everyone for whatever they had, and then just moved on. But the problem with that is nothing was actually stolen. There was money in the house, there was cash left, jewellery, none of it was taken. So if it was a drifter, they killed 6 people for fun and then just walked away with nothing apart from maybe a sandwich that they made, which doesn't really track. And the 5th theory, this one is kind of compelling actually, the Bickler brothers. So remember Crescent, the maid who quit 6 months before? She said that the house was haunted. Yeah, well, she had brothers, Anton and Carl Bickler. They'd worked at the Hinterkaifeck as seasonal labourers. They knew the farm, they knew the layout, they knew where everything was kept. Anton Bickler had reportedly told Crescent multiple times that the Gruber family ought to be dead. And here's the kicker. Crescent, on her deathbed, told her priest that she believed her brothers had done it. She said she tried to tell the police back in the day, but nobody listened to her. So we have two men with a motive. They had the means, they had access to the mattock, and they knew the farm. They had the opportunity, they knew the routine, and a deathbed confession from their own sister pointing the finger at them. So why weren't they convicted? Because by the time Crescent actually spoke up, both of them were already dead. There was no one left to prosecute, and the trail was cold. Finally, in 2007, a group of students at the German Police Academy reopened the case. They used modern criminological techniques, profiling, evidence review, the whole shaboodle, and they reached a conclusion. They said, they think we know who did it. They wouldn't say the name out of respect for the killer's surviving relatives, who are still alive today. They kept it sealed. So the answer might be out there, in a file, in Germany, with a name on it, and we just don't get to know. A few last details because they're worth knowing about. After the bodies were autopsied, and this is going to sound made up, but I promise you it's not, the heads of the victims were removed and sent to Munich to be examined by clairvoyants. Yeah, by psychics. Because the case was so impossible to crack that they brought in mediums to try and talk to the skulls. It didn't work, obviously. The skulls said nothing. And then, and this is the dark part, those skulls got lost during World War II. So the victims of the Hinterkaifeck murders aren't even fully buried. Their heads are just gone somewhere, lost in the chaos of another war. And imagine that being the final indignity for those poor people, murdered in their home, then beheaded for science, then misplaced in war. I mean, I can understand why people are annoyed at Andreas, but the rest of the family, they didn't deserve that. It's just so sad. The farm itself was demolished in 1923, less than a year after the murders. The locals couldn't stand looking at it anymore. They tore the whole thing down. During the demolition, workers found additional evidence, including the murder weapon, the mattock, and the dried blood on it hidden in the attic, and a small penknife stashed in the hay in the barn. Things that the original investigators had missed. Today, where the farm used to stand, there's just a small memorial, a little stone monument, trees and quiet, and people still leave flowers there. They still bring tributes for the kids, which I think they really deserve something because, again, they didn't deserve any of what happened to them. Okay, so my final thoughts on this, because I have a lot of them. I'll try and cut them down so I'm not waffling forever, honestly. What really got to me about the Hinterkaifeck, what genuinely had me like thinking in the middle of the night about them after I was reading about this, isn't the murder. I mean, the murder is really horrific, obviously, but the thing that really bothers me is the build-up, the footprints in the snow that didn't lead away, the newspaper that came from nowhere, the footsteps in the attic that the husband and wife both heard and that the maid heard so clearly that she quit her job, the missing key, the roof tiles moved aside so someone could spy on the family. Somebody was in that house with them for weeks, watching them eat dinner, listening to them argue, sleeping above their bedrooms. So creepy. And they all knew something was wrong. Andreas knew, Victoria knew, even little Kazilla probably knew on some level, and nobody got to leave before anything happened. Why didn't they leave? Some of it was probably just the time and the place. 1922 Bavaria, you just don't abandon a farm, the farm that is your money and your income, your livelihood. It's your everything. You can't just walk away from that. Some of it might be that Andreas was a stubborn old man with a gun who genuinely thought he could handle whatever was coming to him. Which, thinking of what we know of Andreas, he probably did think, like, eye roll. And some of it, and this is the part I think about the most, some of it might be that they were so isolated, so used to being so unpopular, so disconnected from any community that could help them or would help them, that they didn't really believe anyone would come even if they asked them to. So they stayed, and in turn they died. And I keep coming back to little Kazilla, the 7-year-old who told her friend at school the morning before she died that her mum had run into the forest the night before. That little 7-year-old watching her family fall apart in real time, knowing that something was wrong, but going to school anyway. And Maria, who'd been at this farm for just 12 hours. And Joseph, who was just a baby. Whoever did this, whether it was Schlittenbauer, the Bickler brothers, a drifter, someone we don't even have a name for. They were on that farm before the family died. They watched these people and they picked their moment. And I've even got goosebumps thinking about it. And they didn't even run afterwards. They sat in the kitchen and ate dinner, and we still don't know who they were. So that, my friends, is the Hinterkaifeck, as best as I can tell it from what I've researched. If you have a theory, drop it in the comments. Are you Team Schlittenbauer, Team Bickler brothers, Team Random Drifter, Team the German police know and won't tell us, and that's actually kind of unfair? I think it's selfish for me to say that, but I do kind of want to know. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on it though. Genuinely, the thing I want to leave you with is this. We talk about these cases like mysteries and spooky happenings, like the puzzles and stuff to figure out. But Hinterkaifeck wasn't a puzzle to the people who lived it. It was Andreas and Kazilla and Victoria and little Kazilla, Joseph and Maria, 6 real people with their own voices and a future they didn't get to fulfill. And just the 7-year-old that didn't die straight away, which honestly chokes me up. Yeah. If you made it this far, thank you, truly. This one actually really got me in the feels to make this, and I appreciate you sticking around with me through it. If you've got something like a case you want me to have a little look into, send it my way. I will read it and have a look into it. Hit subscribe if you haven't as well, and give me a like, okay? I hate saying that, it makes me feel a bit cringe, but you know, YouTube likes it and the algorithm, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this. It's really weird for me doing a long form. Let's see how it goes. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much. And also maybe check your attic tonight, just for me. Bye bye, ghouls. I'll see you next time. Take care. Sweet dreams, sleep tight, and don't let the scary stories keep you up at night. How about that?